This is the gospel of Jesus Christ according to Luke, the 15th chapter. And this week I am not going to read the gospel reading through and then reflect back on it in a sermon as I typically do. It is a familiar parable for most of us. So instead, I am going to read through it and simply stop at a few points to make some observations, give some questions, probably come out with more questions for us to ponder than there is meaning, which may be appropriate for the season of Lent. The reading begins. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." This is an unheard of proposition. This is the equivalent of the son looking to the father and saying, "Drop dead. I want what is mine." What strikes me, and reflecting upon that this week, is while that was an unheard of affront to appropriateness, the culture of the time, and rather often demonstrated in the Bible, does have a regular practice by which a father could display to the son that he had gone a bridge too far and was now dead to the father and would not receive the inheritance. This is the tearing of clothes that we read about. What this son did, to tell the father that for some reason you are dead to me, was unacceptable. But this father went along with it. The reading continues. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. And many of you may have heard in preaching or in lessons before of the significance of the pigs, that this was an affront. This is an unclean food to be feeding. And so to put ourselves into the mindset of this story, we have to imagine not just hard labor, not just struggling to make ends meet and to feed ourselves. We have to imagine being forced to do work that we think is beneath us, maybe illegitimate, maybe dirty. Work that we wouldn't wish upon our worst enemies to do. And he would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." 2 things. The son had told the father, You are dead to me, give me the inheritance. And yet it is the Father who says, this son of mine was dead. It says something to me about the nature of reconciliation, that we both suffer the loss of the other when the relationship is damaged, and we both come back to life in those rare moments when we can be reconciled. But second, many of us know this parable by the title, The Prodigal Son. We know that phrase well enough that we imagine the word prodigal or prodigious to be associated with ne'er-do-well lifestyles, hedonism, dissolute living, when instead it bears the connotation of extravagance. Extravagance without logic, beyond reason. It is the Father who has thrown this party for a son that has affronted him, that has pulled out all of the stops. It is the prodigal that has shown extravagance beyond logic, and so many have begun to call this the parable of the prodigal father, the one who is truly prodigious in this story. But now the elder son gets involved. The elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But this son of yours comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes. You killed the fatted calf for him." Well, first, there's no statement other than the older son's assumption that it was prostitutes. We know it was dissolute living, but the younger son could have had any choice of poison in his days of misbehaving. But I think many of us, like the older son, when we see people who have fallen on harder times than us, we have to invent a story, add the details that make it so wrong that they deserve to be where they are and should be left there. And we insist these details must be true. It must be prostitutes. And second, I think many of us also, like the older son, describe our own efforts as Herculean. I have been working as a slave for you, when there are actual servants and slaves around him. It is the younger son who came home willing to work as a servant or slave. And finally, we all fall into the trap that if something is given to one to be welcomed into the fold, it somehow means we must give up. We imagine the world as a pie with so many pieces, which makes a prodigal father an insult. And so I am a fan of what is extra biblical here, but I think sheds some of the meaning in the way we can read this. It was a director's choice in the 70s mini-series, Jesus of Nazareth, that when Jesus was telling this parable amongst sinners and tax collectors and Matthew and Peter, the rather bumbling and yet overwhelmingly faithful follower of Jesus, comes up angry. And just as Jesus is done telling this part of the Son's argument that how can you not honor what I have done, Jesus looks Peter in the eye. Looks the camera in the eye. Imagine this being said to those of us, to us, who feel affronted that someone else may have honor we think we deserve. The Father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found. This is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ.